Most people think buying a $500,000 home will cost them about $500,000, maybe $900,000 or so with interest. But for a lot of buyers, that $500,000 house can balloon into something more like $2 million in total costs. And the wildest part, interest isn't even our biggest cost, because within every home purchase are five cost categories that almost no one fully considers before they sign the paperwork. Your bank won't tell you about them, your realtor won't tell you about them, and neither will simple online calculators. So most first-time homebuyers purchase unaware of these massive costs, which is kind of terrifying when you consider that for most people, this could be the biggest financial decision of their lives. Hi y'all, I'm Kev, and today I'm going to show you where that extra 1.5 million comes from, and we're going to break down the real math behind home ownership. Once you see these numbers, you'll never look at home prices the same again. And because every situation is so different, I created a free spreadsheet you can get below so you can run your own numbers. And depending on where you live, it's not clearly a buyer or a seller's market right now, but inventory is tight, which means when a home shows up that you like, you probably won't have weeks to think about it. You might only have hours. And that's what makes buying a home so financially dangerous. You're making an expensive and an emotional decision under very high pressure. And when all that pressure piles on, it becomes very easy to make a 30-year commitment that you might regret. In fact, a 2025 survey by Guardian Service found that 66% of new buyers experience significant unexpected costs. 31% of them experienced buyer's remorse, and nearly 1 in 10 regretted the purchase entirely. But that doesn't have to be you, and my goal here is not to scare you away from buying a home. It's to help you understand the full financial picture before you do buy. So let's start with the single biggest contractual commitment most people will make: the mortgage. Let's say we're looking at a $500,000 home. We're going to do 20% down, which leaves us with a $400,000 mortgage. And right now we're looking at about a 6.5% interest rate across 30 years. That gives us a monthly interest and principal payment of about $2,500 per month, which doesn't sound too bad, but stretched across 30 years, that $400,000 loan turns into about $910,000 in total paid to the bank. And for most buyers, this is where the math stops. They'll look at the monthly payments, they'll calculate the total interest, then they'll assume this is roughly the cost of the house. But really, this is only the beginning of our costs, and ignoring everything that comes after is how people commit themselves to hundreds of thousands in expenses that they were not prepared for. Now let's start layering on those additional costs that most people never look at, using national averages wherever we can. And as we go, we'll see how this $500,000 house slowly turns into something very different. First up, we have trash, water, and sewer. As a renter, this may have been someone else's problem, but as an owner, it's now yours. On average, this is going to be $120 per month, or about $43,000 across 30 years. It's not too scary on its own, but we've already added tens of thousands to our price tag. Next, we have home services and dues. This is the step you quietly sign up for once you move in. Let's say we've got ongoing pest control and lawn care because our neighbor has such beautiful grass, and a pool guy if we're lucky enough or unlucky enough to have a pool. And maybe we want to make an annual donation to the PTA so we can put a sign in our yard. All small on their own, but bundled together across 30 years, we're looking at another 21,000. Next, we have a potentially big one, HOA fees. Nationally, this is about 130 per month, which doesn't sound like a big deal until you realize that that's 48,000 over 30 years. So you can be told how to paint your mailbox and where to park your car. And HOA fees are something that can swing wildly depending on the house that you look at. It can easily be zero in many neighborhoods, but if you want to live in a gated community on a golf course, it could be literally thousands per month. Mortgage insurance is next. It's going to be zero for us, but if we were putting less than 20% down, it could be a very significant monthly cost. Then we have additional insurance. Standard homeowners covers a lot, but not everything. You may want to consider flood if you're in a flooding area. You may want to consider earthquake if you're near a fault line, and likely a wildfire endorsement if you're in an area where you're being dropped, like certain parts of California, Oregon, or Washington. Then there's sewer backup and service line warranties, things you wouldn't really consider until something explodes underground at 2 a.m. someday. Now that we're up to 370 in ongoing additional monthly costs, Let's look at some one-time costs of home ownership. First, let's look at moving and setup, because once you buy a home, you've got to buy a few things that you would never buy otherwise. This might include a moving truck, a lawnmower, again, the neighbors, new furniture because your furniture looks sad in your new place, a washer and dryer because the seller took those, and new blinds for all your windows. And then we have other costs because there's always a few things we don't expect. We want to have a buffer for those surprises. So we're up to about 14,000 for the first few months, and we have closing costs, usually 1 to 5% of purchase price. Let's say we're going to do 1%. So on a $500,000 home, that puts us right at 5,000. And just like that, our total expected costs have moved our $500,000 home all the way up to six figures in costs. And we haven't even gotten to the biggest categories. But these big ones are a little harder to predict. They depend on the individual house, your preferences, and things that were and weren't caught in the inspection. First, we have annual ongoing maintenance, things to keep your house running. Prevailing wisdom is that you should budget about 1% of your purchase price per year on the maintenance. This budget's not for upgrading, it's not for renovating, it's just for keeping things going as they should be. So on our $500,000 house, we're budgeting roughly $5,000 per year. That's going to cost us $150,000 across 30 years. Now we have capital expenditures during the first 5 years. These are things that can really demolish someone's budget if they're not prepared for it. You want to go in with your eyes as wide open as you can for those first 5 years of things that you think might need replacing or things that you know you'll want to do. Let's assume we're not doing an actual remodel on our new house, but there is some stuff that's been deferred. Let's say we want to remove a dead tree, that's $1,500 easy. Let's say we want to do some painting inside and outside, that can run $7,000 or more. And that roof's looking pretty old, it's near the end of life. We will probably need to replace it within 5 years. That's another $11,000, no problem. And remember that labor and material costs have increased dramatically over the last few years. So you do not want to underestimate any of this. Make sure you're getting realistic prices or even quotes before you commit to this stuff. So I think pretty conservatively, we're budgeting another 22,000 for those first 5 years for those capital expenditures. Now let's look longer term, because if you own a home long enough, you'll replace almost everything. You'll have to do the roof again, you'll have to do HVAC eventually, you might have to do new flooring at some point, you have to do paint at some point, you might need to replace the windows even. All these things can really add up, so you want to get a sense of how old things are so you can price some of this stuff out. Or you can just do another rough estimate. Similar to the other 1% we added for maintenance, it's common for people to recommend another 1% or more, specifically for capital expenditures. So that's what we'll do here. So the maintenance and all these replacements adds another 300,000 almost across 30 years, which brings our total cost across that time to over 1.3 million. And we're not done yet. Our next category may sound boring, but over your life as a homeowner, it can really add up. I'm of course talking about taxes. And unlike your mortgage, you have to pay taxes for your entire life as a homeowner. Now, nationally, property taxes average out to about 1%, but it varies drastically depending on where you live. In Hawaii, rates can be closer to 0.3%. Meanwhile, states like Illinois, New Jersey, and Texas can push past 2%. So for our $500,000 home, using a 1% for average, we're looking at $5,000 in our first year in taxes. And it's important to remember that that cost does not stay flat. Over time, your home will likely be assessed at a higher value. And as that happens, your tax rate will also increase. So over a 30-year period, we're looking at about $200,000 in taxes. But thankfully, it's not all bad news, because homeowners get a lot of tax advantages as well. As a homeowner, you can deduct up to $750,000 of mortgage debt, and that deduction was made permanent in a 2025 tax law. You can also deduct state and local taxes, including property taxes, up to the SALT cap. And something very important to remember is that you will only be saving money on your taxes if you itemize. If you always do standard deduction even after buying a home, then you won't save anything on taxes, but you will still be paying property taxes. So you can see that if we did itemize, we would offset some of our tax burden. But altogether, we're still looking at more than $100,000 in taxes across that 30-year period, which brings us up to more than $1.4 million in out-of-pocket expenses across 30 years for our $500,000 home. And at this point, we've gone way deeper than 99% of potential home buyers. when it comes to looking at our expected costs. But we do have a little bit more. We're about to go into the multiverse section of our costs, the alternate timeline. The what if? What if we didn't buy? What if we don't sign a 30-year mortgage and commit to those payments? What if we don't pick up these extra costs? What if we don't put down a down payment? What if instead we continue renting? We own nothing, but we also have no mortgage. We have no liabilities when it comes to repairs and capital expenditures. We don't have to replace any roofs. We don't have to put a down payment down. But during that time, our rent would also be increasing and we wouldn't be building equity in a single family home. And that's what matters so much. It's not today's prices that dictate our financial future. It's what we expect to happen in the future when it comes to growth. Specifically, we want to look at how our home will appreciate across those 30 years versus how our rent will increase. And we want to see what happens with that extra money if we don't spend it on a house. So if we want to look 30 years into the future, we need to first look 30 years into the past. And back then, the median home in America sold for about $140,000. It's now about 3 times as much to buy that same home, which works out to an annualized growth rate of 3.7%. Now, what about rent? Well, 30 years ago, average rent was $550 a month, and over those years, it's grown at a slightly slower rate than homes. The average annualized growth for rental costs is 3.4%. If we plug in those assumptions, we see that our $500,000 home roughly triples, and by the end of that, it becomes a $1.5 million paid off asset for us. Rent, on the other hand, would rise to about $7,500 per month for an equivalent unit. Now, here's where things get really interesting because renters don't just avoid the cost of home ownership, they get to keep that cash and they get to do whatever they want with it. So the real question becomes, what if the renter, instead of buying a house, aggressively invests that money? Because over a 30-year timeline, that money has a long time to grow, and the renter's savings over home buying is going to be particularly concentrated into the first 5 to 10 years. So let's say that if we're going to rent, we're going to invest all that extra cash into a low-cost S&P 500 index fund. Now, like the other predictions, we don't really know what's going to happen, but historically that's returned about 10%, not adjusted for inflation, and that return is what's directly competing against the 3.7% appreciation on our home. Although if we buy the home, we will have extra cash later in the timeline, which we can also invest. So in both instances, we're able to invest, but if we're renting, we're going to be able to invest that money sooner in the market. So we'll have more time to grow. So our timeline is no longer buy versus rent, it's asset versus asset. So we see here in our specific situation with these specific assumptions that the renter ends the 30-year period with a higher net worth, pretty significantly higher. So what we're doing here under opportunity costs is we're going to apply that to the cost of buying a home. So that's another more than $500,000 that we're going to add to the cost of buying a home, which is bigger than the interest costs. It's bigger than the maintenance and taxes. It's bigger than every other single line item that we put for this home. And when we add that in, that opportunity cost, then the full 30-year costs of buying our $500,000 home becomes more than $2 million. And hopefully now you can see that a $500,000 house can turn into something much, much more over a 30-year period. Because the real math behind homeownership is much more complicated and deep than most people realize before they sign the mortgage. So get the spreadsheet for free below, plug in your own numbers, and go in with your eyes wide open before you make one of the biggest financial decisions of your life. Good luck out there. I'll see you next time.